Welcome back to another video on my series of virtual lab. This is, I believe, version lab 4. Now this lab, what we'll do to carry on further labs, we will need to create a domain controller so we can have servers and add it to the domain and have them interact with each other, set up users so we can have single point logins, items like that. So if you've never set up a domain controller, Windows domain controller, I will show you this video how to set up a domain controller. Now we're not talking about federated domains or anything, just a simple domain controller with a DNS server, and we will go through the tasks of setting up the domain controller. It's a server 2012 server. I've set it up in a virtual environment. What we'll do in future videos, we'll add Linux servers to the domain, have them interact so we can have file servers on a Linux, so forth. But without further ado, let's get busy building the domain controller. So when you first set up your 2012 server, so there's 2012 R2. Just called it DC 2012, so domain controller 2012. So I set up a VM. Right now it's 2 gigs of RAM, and we don't need much RAM for just a VM. It's not much usage at the moment. Generally, I would say if you're running a domain in a real world situation, I would say 4 to 8 gigs of RAM. Generally, that's all you're doing with the domain controller, depending on the size again of your domain, size of your, if you're using it at a company or just a basic lab. You could stick with 2 gigs, 4 gigs RAM for now. You could also head into a little further. So if you're trying to connect multiple domain controllers in a domain, let's say you're running an enterprise, you could run multiple domain controllers, and so this way you have basically failover or fault, the login tolerance of all your users. So if they all log in the same time, it'll get to the quickest server. So each server could take login requests. So let's go further here. So first thing you need to do to make a domain controller is, let's go to the local server tab in the server manager. Now I've named the server. What you want to make sure is you have your time zone checked. You want to make sure everything's set up here. So my time zone is -5. So I'm just going to change that now. Eastern. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have the right time zone in your network. Now, if you have additional clocks, you could show them. And if you want to have your server go out to internet time, which I currently do, you could do that. Now, if you have another time server, we can also set up that in a future video as well. So click OK. We have the right time, right date. Everything is fine. Let's just check this flag here to see what it is. Smart screen important. Let's turn it on. Get administrator approval. And there we go. So this way we get rid of anything flagged. Now the first thing you want to do is you want to check your network adapter. So this network adapter, we have one network adapter assigned. We're not using TCP/IP version 6. We're using TCP/IP version 4 in my network. And I've statically assigned an address into my network pointing to same subnet gateway, subnet mask, and a default gateway of my router. I've also assigned DNS to be local because eventually this will be a DNS server. But as an alternate, I have it looking up to my router. So to get out to the internet, it will just fall back to the router because there's nothing locally. Click OK. So my computer's on the network. I can now go back to dashboard, and we want to add roles. Now before we add roles, we need to make sure we have the CD image. So when we install the items, so if you have a DVD, in my case, I have a VM. So on my VM settings, I point the DVD or CD to my ISO file when I installed the OS from a previous video. So on this disk, I have the operating system as Server 2012. Now this is important for when you add roles in here. So now most people will ask me, well, why didn't I just use PowerShell? Well, I like going through the GUI just to show people how to get through the GUI. PowerShell is more of an advanced item to use. In a future video, we will use PowerShell. I just want to add things slowly to get people who aren't doing these items at the moment, who have no knowledge of how to set up these items. That's what my videos are for at the moment, just to bring people up to a lab, to build our labs to be for testing or playing around or adjusting things or just learning things. So this video is meant from the starting person. Most people would have to have some knowledge of what domain controllers are and why you have them. I'm not going to go into that, but most people can go through this and figure it out as well. So let's add a role. And this is just before you begin. It mentions all the items about, we want to make sure you have a password, so forth. We want role-based. Now this is the computer. Now, when you add features, you can actually add features for another computer if you prefer. This is the computer we want to do, this one that we're on right now. So this is, we'll click on next. Now what we want to do is we want to add domain services. Now this is going to add the domain tools, administrative tools and everything, and a PowerShell module and everything. Add features. And we also need to go down to DNS Server. Because with Active Directory relies on DNS for lookups. So it ties the two together. So I'm not sure why when you put the domain services in it, why it would not default to DNS. However, you don't necessarily have to have your DNS on the same server. So that makes sense that it doesn't. But in this case here, I'm making a single domain with one single server. So we will need a DNS server for lookups. Scroll down. And there's nothing else we really want to add to the server at the moment. So we will just do Active Directory domain services and DNS server. Now, right here is Active Directory lightweight directory services. And we also have directory rights management. We don't need any of that at the moment. And I mentioned Federated Services. This is another way as well. This is more advanced items we want to do. So if we want to do single sign-on, web single sign-on, all these things, it ties everything together. But we won't go into Federated Services at the moment because we just want to set up a simple domain and DNS server. Now we will say next. Now, I generally go through here to see if I need any .NETs. And in this case here, we're not going to need anything, so I'm just going to leave those blank. The group policy manager will definitely install because we have an Active Directory. It will now give us a group policy management tools. Need nothing else on here. Sometimes you may want to put a telnet client on. This is so you can telnet out using a command line called telnet. We won't leave it for now. We'll talk about adding this in another video. Because telnet's not installed anymore in Windows Server. You have to actually add it in. And if you're not sure what telnet's for, I'll go over this on another video in the future. So let's go further. Now we want to go next. And we mentioned about AD store, how AD works. Next, DNS server. And we want to restart server automatically. Now what we'll say is no for now, because we want to actually monitor the install. But we could, if we were installing this on a computer and across the network and then reboot it automatically, we could. So now before we click next, we have to actually choose the path. So we need to know what path our CD is. So our CD is D. So in our path, we're going to type D. And then if you look up above here, sources XSS. So let's do that. Now this just points to everything on the CD. For it to install the tools I'm asking for it to install. Let's click install. Now what it's doing is installing all the Active Directory tools. So You notice here, no Active Directory tools. You can also go into Control Panel. I like looking at small icons, administrative tools, and there's no Active Directory tools here. They will appear once Active Directory installs. Go through this. So now this is just adding the components that we need for the Active Directory. Now, if anybody's aware of previous commands, you used to just pull up a command line type DC promo, and that's just promote the computer to a domain controller. And I'm talking Server 2000, Server 2003. Now we're up at past Server 2008. We're up to Server 2012. There's also Server 2016 out there right now. I don't think you can buy licenses for Server 2008 or Server 2012 anymore, or even 2012 R2. But there is some incompatibilities with some softwares out there. I usually show 2012 because 2012 is still kind of relevant. It's not end of life yet. 2008 is in an extended end of life now, I believe. So 2021 or 2020. You can always check that by just doing a Google and look for end of life for Windows. So while this is installing, we can even do that. We can even just look it up. Now, here we go. So now we're installed. Configuration required. Installation succeeded. So now this is where we have to say close because we're done. And let's see what the flag is. So here he says promote server to a domain controller. Let's click on that. And it brings up the tool. Remember how I said earlier, we could just type DC promo from the command line if we wanted to. So let's do it from the GUI though. So deployment configuration, add domain to an existing, add domain to an existing forest, or add a new forest. So let's start a new forest. So domain name, let's call this CompuGuy.info. So now that is a qualified domain name. When we start having servers, the server name, so in this case, EC2012.CompuGuy.info makes it a fully qualified domain name because you're talking the host, the domain, and then the domain suffix. So take this out here. So my root domain is going to be CompuGuy.info. And in the function level, if you have other servers in a domain, you can actually lower the function level. So let's look here. We're going to leave it at server 2012 functionable level because all I'm having domain controllers or anything in control of the domain will all be at this level. So we want to make a DNS server, a global catalog, and the other choice here, it's not letting me choose anything yet because it's still installing them. So now what we want to do is look at the items. So we're installing DNS. We're making this the global catalog server because it's the only domain controller, and the domain controller does keep a global catalog. And what that is all your usernames. And then there's also another choice you could do. If you had more than one domain controller, you could set one as a read-only. So if you have to have let's say you have a large network and you have an office across another city, you could put a read-only domain controller at that city that it just read-only. It just gets information from that domain, for instance, login information, so to make logins quicker. But if someone changes their password, it's not going to change it on that read-only server. It's going to find another server it can make writes to. So you can actually make domain controllers a little more secure by making them read-only at sites where you don't want changes happening. Just going to close some of these windows here just to make it simpler. So we're just waiting for this to allow me to make changes. Okay, so have that. Make sure there's nothing in the background waiting for my answers. Okay, so I'm going to set the domain function. We'll leave it at 2012. Of course, it's not letting me choose anything yet, so we'll just wait a second. Because what it wants to do now is set up a password for restoring. So once it allows me, I'm going to type in a password just for restore. So there we go. So I could change any level, 2008, 2008 R2, 2012, or 2012 R2. We will leave them both at 2012 R2. And they will be domain controller, DNS server, sorry, and a global catalog. So in here, you can set up a simple password just for recovery if you want. Type password. And then it opens up the other options. Let's click next. And then the verification password fails because it does not meet the requirements. It wants a little more secure password. So you need to make like a capital letter, an @ sign or something, some special character and a number. So let's go capital P at SSW 0R. Try this again. P at SSW 0RE. And let's see if this lets us pass the complexity. There we go. Delegation for DNS cannot be created because the authoritative parent cannot be found. Right. So we don't want to make a delegate. So click OK. Say next. Verify Netbios. So once it gives me the chance to come back. So it's going to drop the .info because NetBIOS is just a single name lookup. So it's just a computer name. So it's just going to use CompuGuy. So say next. Because the domain name we created was CompuGuy.info, and that's a DNS lookup. So now what it's doing is making the sysvol folders. So NTDS, that's database folder, log folder, and then the sysvol folder. And this is where your login scripts and some other information for Active Directory sits. So let's click next. Let's review. Everything looks good. And now it will also show a PowerShell because what this GUI does is builds a PowerShell script and just runs PowerShell script. So if you want to see the script, you would just type this in PowerShell and it would do all the work that you're telling it to do here. But this is a GUI video, so we can see what's happening rather than just type a command and come back saying done. Let's click next. And right now it's checking all the prerequisites to see if this machine is capable of being a domain controller. And as you can see here, I have other computers in my VM environment. I do enjoy having a VM lab because I get to test things, test different operating systems. I do a lot of testing for work on my work computer, but my home computer, this computer here, it's just mainly my learning tools, my learning toys for creating videos for YouTube. Anybody who's looking for anything specific, let me know what you need and I can make a video to help you understand what you're trying to learn or trying to fix. My next video, I believe my next video will be a clustering video, how to cluster two machines together to allow them share like a SQL database. So that's one of my upcoming videos. I'm going to redo an older video I have of doing a 2012 cluster with each other and how to have them fail over to each other. So with doing that, I need to make a prerequisite video of a storage, third-party storage like iSCSI or SAN. So that will be an upcoming video. So here we are here. So it says all prerequisites checked and everything's ready to go. So click install to begin. So let's do it. So right now it's doing the promotion. While it's doing the promotion, we'll just go back in the control panel here and see if any new tools have showed up. And as you can see, the tools are being installed. You're getting a lot more tools now for managing a domain. Minimize that, go back here and wait for it to finish. And this is just a basic how to get a domain controller going, and then you can add servers to a domain, and then we can log in with one single account across multiple computers. So if you currently have a network, for instance, where you're creating users and you're creating their passwords, and they have to log on to one machine, and then when they log on another machine, you have to create a copy of that user onto those machines, or they have different passwords. This is where an Active Directory comes in handy. It's a centralized place where all your accounts are, and you can put permissions on different servers and different locations and different items. You can add printers and give permissions to those printers, all centrally from within Active Directory. So rather than go and create multiple accounts with multiple passwords, you set one account, one password, and then get to all the resources on your network. So file servers, application servers. You can get into, if you set up a Citrix server, you can do that. Set up Linux machines and get to them. Lots of configuration involved with doing so, but you can tie them all together, so this way you don't have to have multiple passwords and accounts. So as you see here, some of the alerts. In Windows Server 2012, domain controllers have a default for security settings named Allowed Cryptography Algorithms compatible with NT4 that prevents weaker. So this domain controller can talk to NT4 servers as well, but NT4 is pretty much no longer around. I'm not sure why they would set security like this, but this is default setting. We can always adjust those when we get further into the domain controller. The other one here, delegation for DNS, we saw that already. So we haven't got a parent zone yet. So once we get Active Directory installed and running and reboot the server, we'll then take a look at that as well. And it mentions here that if you're integrating with an existing DNS structure, you should manually create delegation records. But because we're not, we don't need to do anything. So this is just warnings letting you know of the things that are incompatibility, and also that if you don't have a DNS server in place, or you have another server in place you can't connect, you then get there to configure it to integrate with everything. So in this case, it's one machine doing everything. So we have the DNS server here. If I click on it, it probably isn't up and running yet, but let's take a look. See if it opens. There you go. So there's our DNS. So the DNS has been set up. It's still going. So let's see if Active Directory's users and computers, also short form ADUC, ADUC. Let's see if ADUC is working. And of course it says, no, you can't. It's not there yet. So just wait a few minutes for this to come up. But as you see, nothing comes up in Active Directory yet because it's not actually ready to go yet. So close that. But DNS has been set up. So let's go into DNS here. No forward lookups, no reverse lookups, no conditioners. So even though the service is set up, none of the initial domain information has been put in yet, but it's still installing. So let's wait for that to happen. And there you go. Server is there. It's ready to sign out. I'll click close, and it's probably going to reboot us any second now. Let's see how long that takes. There you go. So it's going to reboot automatically. Now let's hope I remember the original password for this machine. As you see, I do run a VMware lab, VM environment. I enjoy using VMware products. Workstation is what I use here on this machine, and I have multiple machines I do run in my own lab. Booting up. See down here, we have hard drive, we have CD, monitors, network, sorry. We have sound, and we have messaging. Boot up. Now, like I said, I have other servers here to try and set up a cluster. This is next videos. I'll be creating those videos soon enough. But just gonna get rid of some of these. Go back to 12 DC, and let's see if we're ready to go. We now have a domain controller. Just waiting for it to boot up. Click here, click here. There we go. Okay. Just had to wait a second for the screen to refresh here. So it's booting up. The usual please waits. Putting everything in place. Now, once you do install a domain controller and you have all these functions and features added, you might want to do a Windows updates to have it pull down any patches that might fix or update some of the items you just installed. Be nicer if Microsoft would put a counter here. Let you know how long it's actually going to take. I've seen servers after Windows updates recently sit and sit and sit and sit for like 15-20 minutes, and then finally it tells you it's got 50%, 60%. Just the way it patches, I guess. Okay. It does take a few minutes for this server to come up. While we're checking here, why don't we check what our server runs on? So I have set up for 2 gigs of RAM, 1 CPU, 60 gigabytes of hard drive space. It's using that CD. I can disconnect that once we're booted in. Bridge to my network adapter. I have USB ports. And I'm just using the default settings for all the other items. Click OK, and here we are. So now it's applying security policy. Here we go. Now we're ready to run. So click on here. And let's look for send, Control-Alt-Delete. Now, if you're in here, you can also do Control-Alt-Insert as well. So let's see what the password is. Okay, looks like... Okay. I was going to say, looks like I forgot the password, but no. So it's a good idea before you do reboot, you know your password in your machine. Built this one a while ago for this video and I left it sitting. So here we are, we run Windows Server 2012. We have domain controller running now. It will let us know our roles are done. So let's wait for this. Make this full screen. So now it says we're ready to go. So let's close this down. And now let's go and find out tools are usable now. Administrative tools. And let's open up Active Directory users and computers. And here we are. The domain is CompuGuide.info. That's our root domain. So now sometimes what you might want to do is create a root domain, and then you might want to create another domain controller and have separate domains. So if you have a development domain and a production domain, you can call one dev.compuguide.info and create another domain, a child domain of this root forest in the forest. And you can create a production server called prod.compuguide.info. So this way, if you want to keep your production and development separate, because you really should separate the items. Now, the only thing with that is you'd have to create an account at this level to let them in both sides. Or you could separate them and say development is development, prod is prod. So in this case here, I just want a single domain controller in its root domain. So this is what we'll use for now. It has a ton of users here already created. Domain admins, domain computers, controllers. So we'll just leave those accounts. Those are just ones always there. Now we have no computers in the domain, but we have one domain controller. This is the first site, first machine of this domain. Let's right click here. And let's go to Operation Masters. And now you see it's a RID, right? So relative ID. So this here is all the components of Active Directory. So the operations master is this machine. So you can move the master around to a different machine if you decide. You could change roles. So these are roles, PDC, so primary domain controller. If you have been around with Windows for years, in NT4 they had a primary and a backup server. In Active Directory, they do have a primary domain controller. You know, the main one you want to say is the master. So this is where you could do it. But really, all of them are equal in actions, such as users are created, you could change passwords. Any one of them could take the password change, a new user request, so forth, all those items. Let's go to infrastructure. So everything is pointed to this machine, which is what we want. If you have multiple domain controllers, you can switch them and change the roles to different machines. So with this domain, we'll just leave that default and say that it's all simple here, done. Okay. These here are called object units, organizational units. So if I right click here, I could say new OU, organizational unit. So think about this like a filing cabinet. You want to organize them. So let's say I want to say printers. So now it creates one called printers. So if I create any printers and add them, I could put them in here. All my printers will be listed here. So normally all computers, when you first join the domain, they'll be here. And you can actually separate them if you wish. So I'm just going to delete the printers when I create because we don't need it. This is a good idea to keep it as organized as you probably can. Organized as you can. So here's a good idea here. So now we've tried to delete it. It says do not have rights. The object is protected. So when you do that, right click on it, say properties, manage by. So now what we want to do is here, properties. There is a tab that actually says to restrict accidental deletion. And we'll look at that after. So for now, we just want to create that. Now, created myself a user, sorry, a domain. We have that domain set up. Let's go to DNS. And in DNS, we should have forward lookup of the domain because everything you create will add itself here. So as you see, DC 2012, right? So it'll do here. Reverse lookup should always be set up as well because have DNS lookup from reverse, right? Let's create a reverse lookup, new zone. Next, primary zone because it is primary. And let's store the Active Directory here as well. Next. There, so how you want your zone replicated to all DNS servers. We only have one at the moment, so let's click next. And we want to do IPv4 reverse lookup. And now the network ID. So now if we look here, what is our IP address? So look here, the network IP. Our network IP is 192.168.0.20. So type in the network ID of the zone. 2 168.0. So everything in this network ID that we'll start using in add or ARPA is the reverse lookup. Let's go next. Allow secure updates. So let's say allow only a secure update, so only Active Directory can update this. And click finish. So now we have a reverse lookup. So when we go to ping something, it will then come up with this name because it'll look up the name and IP. So a reverse lookup is really important to have. So this is how you set up your basic setup of your domain. There's the computers, and I'll show you in a second. We will add a computer to domain to show you that. So global logs, we have all our DNS events, forwards, trust points. We don't really care too much about the rest for now. We just have a DNS server. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it in a very quick how to set up a domain controller. So like I said, what we'll do is go here. Now let's name this one. Let's go here to local server, just to show you what this is like to add a domain controller. So let's start off by checking out IP address. Make sure this machine is on the network. I've been doing some other things with these machines, so they may be running a little slow at the moment. Okay. Settings. So the IP address of this machine is 21. Okay, 192.168.0.21. It's on the same network, and now I already set this up with pointing to the DNS server of 20, which is the domain controller. Let's click OK. I've already set this up a little bit ahead of time. So now we see computer name. Let's click on the computer name, and I'm going to call this one CL1 because this will be cluster 1. Let's go C1, and we want to join a domain. Domain is compuguy.info. And we want to click next. Click OK, sorry. And it should come up with a login to authorize the account that will go onto that machine. So that is the administrator. Okay. Password I know. Click OK. Now if the password and username is correct, let's go over to domain controller here. See how it says join the domain? Let's go back to domain controller. And let's go back into that administrative tools. Active Directories, users, and computers. Minimize everything while we have this up. Okay. Let's go to computers. Now see how it added CL1? Because we added it to the domain. So now when I open this now, click OK. It's just doing all its final checks. This is a reboot will be necessary. That's because we changed the name of the computer and we also added it to the domain. So now a lot of times if this is a physical machine, you might want to remote to it using remote desktop tools. So let's say allow. This is a practice I always do. I allow RDP and I say apply. Once it's finished, restart. And now this machine will restart as a member of the domain. So now, right now, I've been logging on locally. So I'll show you CL2. I've been logging on locally as a local administrator. As in the administrator for this machine with its own password. Now that I've added CL1, this computer, CL1, is going to reboot now and I can log on with the same account as here. So let's go to users. Let's test this. Let's say new user. Let's call me CompuGuy. Whoops. Here, CompuGuy. Okay, and call myself CompuGuy as my user ID. And notice how it's CompuGuy.info. And I'm just going to set password. Okay, and I don't want to change my password, so I'm going to uncheck that. Now, sometimes you might create service accounts and items that you may not want to change the password. So I'm going to put password never expires. Now, I don't recommend that. That's not a good security practice. But in a test lab like mine, I'm just going to do that just in case I forget the password. So now I have a username CompuGuy. Now let's test this. So when this boots up, I'm going to try and log on as CompuGuy. Now what I'm also going to do, because CompuGuy is a simple user right now, CompuGuy has to have a little more privileges to get onto the server. So I'm going to go to Properties. And for CompuGuy, I want to put him a member of the administrators group. Because without that, I wouldn't be able to log on a machine. Now remember, this is the local administrator. So what we need a domain administrator, because now we're a domain. So now this will let me log in as an administrator in all the computers. Not watching what I'm typing. Spell it right. Okay, so now I'm a domain admin. That lets me connect to every machine that I add to the domain. So now I can control every computer. Now, if you just want certain users to have certain rights, then you don't do this here. This is just for me to log on to every machine in the domain. Now, it's one way of doing it that way. If you're doing role-based access, you may want to just delegate certain rights. Delegating certain rights. So, for instance, we can go here. We can say privileges. I could say permissions, right? So let's go member of. Now I can add to any group I want. But there's ways of delegating users. So delegate control. I could delegate users to use certain privileges. Just to show you some of this for a second while the other computer is booting. Go advanced, find now. Okay, so I could delegate, let's say Hyper-V admins. I could delegate someone to be there for that. So we could delegate certain privileges for certain things we want to do. But this video is just beyond, that's just beyond the scope of this. I just want to show you how to set up a simple domain controller with simple users, adding computers to the domain. So as you see, CL1 is part of the domain, and CompuGuy is a user in the domain right here. There he is. Now these are groups, and that's a user. I added it to the domain admins group. Domain admins group member should have me in there. And let's go to the second server. Let's see if we can log on this server as that user. Now the default is local admin. Okay, so change that. We don't want to go local. We want to join the CompuGuy domain. So the user is CompuGuy. Password. And now this will go to the domain controller and checks my user and logs me in. And there I am. I'm being logged on. It's now creating a little profile for me. Just like you do on your home computer. You know, Windows 10 that I'm using here creates a profile when you first log on. And it will do that for every machine you add. So now because I'm a domain administrator, I can log on any computer. So if I want to log off this computer as administrator, I can log on as CompuGuy. Let's try that. Go. So I'm logging on multiple computers as CompuGuy. Right? CompuGuy. and I can do anything on this machine because I am a full admin. Now, I mentioned earlier, you normally wouldn't do that for people. Let's say you want CompuGuy only to control the server, not the whole domain. So you'd have to go locally onto the server. Let's load up the tools here. I clicked it too many times. So on the server locally, you want to go to the control panel, administrative tools, computer management, because we want to manage this computer. Now you could do it through here as well, but I just choose to do it this way. Nice. There's the computer management tool. That's the server manager. So let's minimize server manager. I like using the computer management tool. You go to local users and you have administrator, which is a local administrator, and groups. Administrators groups lets domain admins be part of it. This is why CompuGuy is able to log in. And administrator. So let's go back to domain controller. Minimize this. Let's create another user. So we want to go to ADUC. Open the domain. User. So there's CompuGuy. So now let's test user. Let's call this one test. So let's say test is a vendor or something, right? So, or test is someone who you're asking to take care of a machine. Let's undo that, but we want to leave it as buyers who want them to have to change their password in the future. So let's here. So now we have a test user. Let's say you want test user to control this server, but nothing else. This you will add test. Test user will go to the domain, check, it finds test. So now that user will be administrator, have administrative rights on this machine, but no other machine. Couldn't log on here, but can log on here. So let's test that. Let's go here, log off. Let's go here, off. So from domain controller, test. I want to log in as a different user, log in as test. Okay, and right there is not allowed because you're not an administrator. But now let's go here, try this one. There, test. And you're able to log on. So I have rights to this machine, but not any other ones. This is where you let people, you have centralized users, but you only let them on certain devices. This is how you can actually control them with Active Directory. So maybe in my next video, I'll create a Linux machine, and just to show you how we can have Linux, we can even have Mac machines connect as well. Let's go again. So there you have it. So now we have a domain controller and we have a member of the domain, and we can control them centrally from within this machine. Here, if you want, you could just right click, create shortcut, and now you have Active Directory tools. So we'll go here. We have one computer, one domain controller, and one of my future videos, I'll just go through and install, add it to the domain. We'll see this. So in the future, this domain controller will have 5 or 6 servers, maybe 10 servers. So that's pretty much it. That's the basics of installing a domain controller. There we go. And if you reboot any of these machines, always make sure your domain controller is online before any other ones are rebooted, because when they reboot, they're going to check in with the domain to see if it's still part of the domain. If it doesn't see a domain controller, they won't boot in and they won't connect to the domain. So you'll be stuck using local users because you won't be able to log in. So there you have it. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, anything you want to add on, any more advanced items you want to know about in domain controllers. I'll gladly show them to you and see what else you want to learn. So thank you again for watching. See you next time.